The forest has always had a way of making people feel small, but for Daniel, it felt like something else entirely, like he was being watched. He had gone hiking alone in a dense woodland known for its beauty and isolation. Locals had warned him not to stay past sunset, but Daniel wasn't the kind of person who believed in superstition. As the sky darkened and the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind towering trees, he realized something was wrong. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, just an unnatural stillness that pressed against his ears. Then, faintly, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, deliberate, matching his pace. When he turned around, there was nothing there. Just endless trees stretching into darkness. Trying to shake off the unease, Daniel picked up his pace, convincing himself it was just his imagination. But the footsteps continued, always just behind him, never getting closer, never falling behind. Panic began to set in. He took out his flashlight, its beam cutting weakly through the darkness, and called out, "Hello." The only response was the echo of his own voice. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped. Relieved but still tense, Daniel turned around once more, and this time he saw something. Far between the trees, just beyond the reach of his light, stood a tall, thin figure. It wasn't moving. It wasn't making a sound. It was just watching him. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs felt frozen. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then, in a voice that sounded eerily like Daniel's own, it whispered, "Hello." His blood ran cold. Without thinking, he turned and sprinted through the forest, branches slapping against his face as he ran blindly. The voice followed him, calling his name now, mimicking his tone perfectly. "Daniel, wait." It sounded so real, so familiar, that for a moment he almost stopped. But something deep inside him knew. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. He didn't stop running until he burst out of the forest hours later, collapsing near the roadside, shaking and unable to speak. The second story comes from a group of college friends who decided to camp deep in the woods one summer. There were 5 of them, all excited for a weekend away from the noise of the city. They set up their tents near a small clearing, laughing, telling stories, and enjoying the warmth of a campfire. As the night grew darker, they began sharing scary stories, each trying to outdo the other. Eventually they laughed it off and decided to sleep. Around 3 a.m. one of them, Lisa, woke up to a strange sound. It was faint at first, like someone humming softly in the distance. A group of young college friends gathered around a small campfire in a forest clearing at night, tents set up nearby, scattered backpacks on the ground, warm orange firelight illuminating their faces while darkness surrounds them, tall trees enclosing the clearing, contrast between cozy atmosphere and looming, transition into late-night silence, one girl awake inside a tent listening to a faint distant humming sound, eerie shift in mood, cinematic horror lighting, cold shadows creeping in. High detail, ultra-realistic, 4K, depth of field, suspenseful tone. Terrified, Lisa quickly woke the others, whispering urgently for them to stay quiet. They all peeked out and saw the figure together. The humming stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the figure began walking toward their tents, its movements jerky and uneven. One of the friends grabbed a flashlight and shone it directly at the figure. Instantly it disappeared. Not ran. Not hid. It was just gone. The group didn't wait to find out more. They packed up their things in complete panic and drove away in the middle of the night. None of them spoke about it again, but all agreed on one thing. They had all seen it. The third story is perhaps the most disturbing. It comes from a man named Eric, who worked as a forest ranger for years. He had spent countless nights alone in remote watchtowers, used to the sounds and rhythms of the forest. One night, while stationed in an isolated area, he received a radio call from another ranger. The voice was shaky, filled with fear. "There's someone out here," the voice said. "They keep knocking on the tower door." Eric immediately grabbed his equipment and headed out to assist, navigating the dark forest using only his flashlight and instincts. When Eric arrived at the tower, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He called out for the other ranger, but there was no response. The door to the tower was slightly open, creaking softly as it swayed. Inside there was no one. The radio lay on the floor, still crackling with static. Confused and uneasy, Eric picked it up, and then he heard it. Knock. Low. Heavy. Coming from outside. But Eric was already inside the tower. His heart began to race as another knock echoed, this time from the walls themselves, as if something was circling the structure. The radio suddenly came to life again. "Don't open the door," the voice whispered. It was the same ranger's voice, but Eric was holding the radio, and no one else was inside. Then came another voice, identical but slightly distorted, saying, "Let me in." The knocking grew louder, more aggressive, shaking the entire tower. Eric backed away, gripping his flashlight tightly, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Whatever was outside wasn't human, but it knew how to sound like one. Eric stayed inside until morning, refusing to move, refusing to respond. When the sun finally rose, the knocking stopped. Slowly he stepped outside. There were no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. The other ranger was never found. Official reports labeled him as missing, but Eric knew the truth was far more disturbing. To this day, he refuses to go near that part of the forest. Because sometimes in places where no one should be, something waits. Something that watches. Something that listens. And worst of all, something that learns how to sound exactly like you.